So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. Today I will be moderating the webinar. We will also be recording it. So for those of your colleagues that could not make it live, please let them know and encourage them to view the webinar later on. Today we move to discuss the topic of how to deal with the failure. During the first webinar, we touched upon the issue of student engagement. Basically, today we can still link the topic with the student engagement, how to engage students better, how to motivate them to achieve success, and if something does not go well, how to deal with the failure. Let me first present a short outline of today's webinar. So I will start as a moderator of today's webinar with an introduction on the topic of failure, why it is worth talking about it, why is it important, especially when we talk about innovative pedagogies. Then we will move to the group discussions. We have 3 online training groups, and we would like to hear from the participants, training participants and group leaders from each of the groups. So just to give an order, we might start with the PBL group and feedback on the discussion from the group leader. Then we might move to the simulations group and later on to the e-learning group, basically keeping the same order as they are listed on the platform randomly. And at the end, I would welcome a cross-group discussion, basically any open questions. But we can also go with the flow and see if there are some issues, cross-cutting issues that are worth discussing. We can also be flexible regarding the structure of the discussion. Let me just remind you how you can participate in our discussion. One way is via our chat, and I will be talking but also following the chat, and also our group leaders and Alex and Silvio will be monitoring what's going on the chat, so we can answer you either in a written form or catch up with your issues, questions by talking. You can also raise the hand and by pushing the raise the hand button, and we will give you the floor in case if you would like to talk. Basically feel free to choose the method that suits you better. Now, moving to the discussion as such, why failure is important and why nowadays, and specifically within the framework of our project, Innovating Teaching and Learning of European Studies, it is important to tackle this issue. First of all, it is important because we talk about a change in the learning process, a change in the role of the teacher, and we cannot ignore the fact that things do not always go the way we want. And it works both in the case of the instructor and in the case of the students. Failure might happen either in the process of course design, course implementation, or in the process of learning from students' point of view. That is why we decided to leave the topic rather broad today, to talk about different types of failures, to talk about different causal relationships between the failure in the learning process and different factors that contribute to the failure, so that we might reflect upon the mechanisms of preventing the failure or controlling the failure in order to increase the success of the learning process. Or we can also reflect in a different way to give you a more specific reference. So different groups in our online training suggested different readings with different perspectives on the failure. For example, we can start talking about learning by doing and failure as a learning process, a learning experience. Some of the readings on simulations and role-playing talk specifically about designing strategies of making failure as one of the learning strategies, developing student cognitive and affective skills by giving greater appreciation and attention to losers in a learning process and to losing strategies when dealing with student engagement in a learning process. But also, for example, the PBL group and simulations group has shared some reflections on active learning, a blog post that tackles the issue of making failure a routine in the learning process, basically aiming at a learning approach in which failure becomes a routine, and the issue of repeatedly practicing failure and getting constant feedback in order to learn from the failure as an experience, as a skill. In the e-learning blended learning group, I also suggested some more specific readings for this particular teaching method, because there is a lot of talk and debate about the failure in general of the e-learning, the failure of MOOCs, for example, massive open online courses. And I considered it an important aspect to understand why is there so much talk about the failure, potential failure, risks of failure in the e-learning, blended learning, and what are the factors that trigger the failure, either the failure in the process of learning from the student side, linked to student failure, student engagement, or the failure during the process of course design and course implementation. By leaving the floor open to talk about failure from different perspectives and leaving it at the discretion of the three groups to focus or highlight different major issues regarding the failure in the learning process, we are welcoming now any contributions regarding student failure, failure as a way of learning, including especially your personal experience of failure with some training assignments during our online training, such as during designing your own simulation game, or during the course content development assignment, or some PBL assignments. I am opening officially the discussion, and I'm giving the floor to the PBL group as suggested.
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay, welcome. Natalia, do you hear me now? Okay. I assume silence is agreement that you can hear me. First of all, greetings from Maastricht. I think the introduction by Natalia was already a very good starting point for what our group in problem-based learning was preparing for this meeting. And I want to thank all the colleagues who actively contributed and reflected also on the questions. In the end, we had three big themes or three questions that we were looking at. So the first one was really, why should we think about failing at all? So what is it about failing, about student failing, student learning that we should consider? The second one was really more of how can we design materials that allow for controlled failing. And then the third one was, let's talk about examples where we can get tips of why we should take failing into account. And what I did in terms of preparation, I just took the comments of our colleagues that I found most challenging, or that I found were really interesting for these three different questions. So the first one, why should we think about failing? I really like this comment by Lisanne, who said, well, we have to embrace making mistakes for learning. And I think that also goes back what Natalia was saying, that if you think about when we learn, it's really when we realize we made a mistake and next time we do it differently. In the literature, it's also a lot mentioned that it's part of critical thinking. So in the end, being able to think in different ways also means that sometimes you figure out what are the better ways and what are the ways that don't work so well. From the PBL teaching, in the end, what I think is also important is to realize is, as most of us teach politics, it's also about developing teaching materials that are real. And in reality, politics often fails. And I think Simon will be able to confirm that also in negotiations. I think it's a good experience for students to sometimes realize not having an agreement is as real as it can get in politics. I also like the comment by Max very much, who was saying, well, people remember the situations when they failed better than the successes. And I was a bit thinking about it because I think he's right. And I think it is because when we fail, we are forced to think of what we were doing. We are forced to think of what kind of decisions did we make and what were the wrong ones. So I think it's really important to keep this in mind, that it's not only about failing, but it's really also then about reflection and trying to come up with strategies of not repeating the same mistakes. The last comment to the first question that I found very interesting was by Ludmila, who said, well, teaching students how to fail is as important in teaching them how to succeed, because in the end, this will prepare them for life. So this idea that we have to help students to understand also in their jobs, they will sometimes fail. They will make wrong choices. But the important decision that they are making then is how they, in the end, deal with this failure. So that was more or less our starting point. We didn't talk so much about what to do when PBL fails, but what we were more focusing on of how can we design materials in problem-based learning that allow students to fail in a controlled environment. And again, I think I got some very, very good examples from our group. So on the one hand, of course, when we talk about materials in problem-based learning, it's very important to build in debriefing moments, to build in reflection moments. This means on the one hand that one guides students in their reflection, but also that one has enough time and allows students in the end to catch up and to consider and to reflect. I liked a proposal by Galina, for example, very much, who was saying, well, I think it would be a good idea to always begin the class with a reflection on how did it go last week and what were the elements that were not so successful, what were the elements that we want to change in our learning process. So I think that that could also be a good way of also institutionalizing this reflection moment. Another element, and it relates to this idea of providing time and space, came from Max, who was saying, well, then would be good in the end to build up assignments so that you start letting students work and then you give them feedback. You give them a moment where you think and check together, are we going in the same direction before they move on? And I thought that was a very, very useful comment because in the end it gives students a bit of security. And that's something we realized in Maastricht very much with problem-based learning. Students are very insecure of making mistakes. They don't feel comfortable in experimenting because they are so scared of failing. But I think with developing teaching materials that build up slowly, you can help students to say, okay, experiment, and if it goes not well, we can always adapt before we move on. For the last question, so this was really about examples of how people use this idea of failing and what we learn of them. And I just wanted to mention in the end 5 points again that I picked up because I thought they were quite interesting. This importance of feedback on skills. And that's something that we also realized in Maastricht. If a PBL group doesn't work, I had a tendency to jump in and fix the content. Oh, we didn't understand the European Parliament. Let me explain you the European Parliament. But actually, what's much more important is that you then take a step back and talk with the students. Why did the session go wrong? What did we do in our learning process that we have to do differently next time? Another example that I found quite interesting and worthwhile to mention was this idea of designing material that forces students to understand there is not one perfect way of doing something. There's not one right solution in the end. Again, because it gives them the space in the end to experiment, to try different routes. Sometimes also to figure out, okay, another route would have been different. But by not making it black-white, it can help in the end to allow students to experiment a bit better. Perhaps one last point that I want to make is something that came out a lot in the preparation was we as instructors in an active learning environment, we have to also show students that it's okay to fail. Not in the exam, but it's okay in between to try, to experiment, to realize we did something wrong, to evaluate the decisions that we make, and then move on. So that's more or less what we came up with. I'm also happy to talk a bit later if you want a bit more about what to do if PBL fails, but I think I will leave it at this point.
Thank you, Heidi. It was very nice to see your approach to failure and the importance of failing, going also beyond the PBL and sharing your personal experience and how tips, somehow tips how to do it. Would anyone from the PBL group would like now to reflect more specifically or to share your reflections, because I saw that there were quite a number of you that have posted online your reflections. You can raise your hand or you can write and we'll give you the floor. Ludmila, would you like perhaps to talk about your reflection on failure? Until Ludmila is trying to set her microphone, I would like to read her post. She says that it is important to first identify the nature of failure. So basically referring to the factors that triggered the failure. It is about students' misunderstandings of rules or of what to do and how to do, the lack of experience and so on. Or is it about failure because of the complexity of the situation, the issue discussed? I agree that these are actually cross-cutting issues no matter what type of method we are talking about, including within the e-learning field, going beyond the traditional learning environment. The contributing factors to the success or failure of the learning process are also linked to potential misunderstandings of the rules, when things are not clear enough or are vaguely explained. That is why, for example, as the suggested readings for the e-learning group highlight, it is important to be very specific in the process of a course design, in the process of course implementation also, and to offer constant support and interaction to students in case if there is a misunderstanding, to be able to actually clarify again the rules, to intervene and fix the problem as quick as possible. Now, anyone else perhaps from the PBL group would like to share their views on the role of failure within the PBL setting or beyond, more broadly, in the learning process? Heidi, I don't remember by heart all the PBL participants, but perhaps you might also help me out by suggesting someone who has written some posts from your group to speak up to make it more interactive?
In the end, we had 4 people who prepared. It was Lisanne, but she can't be here because she's in South Korea. Galina, Max, and Ludmilla.
Okay, thank you. Max, Galina, would you like to take the floor and speak about your reflections on how to deal with failure? I see that Max is typing. Okay, we will give a couple of minutes to Max. So far, I would like to just read some of your comments. I'm glad to see that everyone is so active in sharing your comments and reflections. I see that many agree with Ludmila and support her opinion about the importance of looking not just at the failure process, but at the factors that caused the failure. And Anatoly Kruglashev, for example, highlights the importance of the failure in the process of communication, for example, and how this can trigger misunderstandings and failures regarding student engagement, or instructors' role in the learning process. That's true, as Heidi says. One problem is also that students do not usually communicate, but they just put forward their arguments. So sometimes what we experience in the classroom is something like a monologue when students are preparing at home some particular arguments, or especially in the case of PBL, with which I'm also familiar. They prepare the learning objectives, they come to the classroom, they are ready to share them. But the challenge is actually to discuss and to react to other students' arguments and to engage more actively in the class debate, or to reflect upon the different ideas that are shared in the classroom. So let me just go through the other suggestions. Aneta, for example, says that when we think about how to implement in practice some strategies of dealing with failure, it's important to include reflection, to feedback, debriefing, to the Silicon Valley mantra, and basically to also stress the importance of failing fast, because this would give us room to improve, to reflect on the failure, and to learn from the failure process. That's a very good suggestion, Aneta. Thank you for that. Now, if I would ask still perhaps more specifically the PBL training participants, did you experience failure in the online training process? What kind of failure was that, and how did you deal with that? Or also asking Heidi as an instructor, how did you deal with the failure, and especially regarding student engagement also, which is still a challenge for us in the training process? I see Max is ready to talk, so I would like to give the floor to you, Max, while the others reflect on the question that I just posted. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Max. I can hear you very well.
Okay, nice. Sorry, I was sitting in a public space. I didn't want to to look like a fool talking to myself there. So first of all, your initial question was my reflections on failing and in relation to PBL. I think Heidi already went through a few of the points that I had put on paper. But first of all, since in quite many universities students are not used to PBL, and PBL is something new, I think it's important in the beginning to explain to the students that they can fail, and that we are all new to this kind of way of learning. So so we need to be prepared that everything will not go as expected the first time, and that's okay. So I think that's the first step.
Okay, until Max is back, let me just go through your posts further. I see a lot of people agreeing with Heidi and with the role of motivation also, with students being well prepared. And let me just give it some more time to go through the posts. Yeah, the Natalia Rotar, for example, suggests starting reading in the classroom. On the first course, it helps to understand the benefits of training to employment. I think this is an important exercise, actually, reading together in the classroom. I have myself used this kind of in-class exercise, giving short pieces of text and giving some time for the students to read and then reflect upon several main questions in the classroom. And I think this is a very good way of making the students engaged and at the same time giving them basically an equal opportunity of preparing themselves on the spot and engaging more actively with their peers in discussing some major questions, with the instructor being basically the moderator of the discussion. I can see that Simon cannot hear me. Everybody else, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Silvio and Alex, I would like to let me know if there is some experience regarding my microphone. Thank you. So, yeah, basically we went beyond PBL at the moment already. So if anyone would like to take the floor to talk about some of your posts to build upon something that we just said, you are free to do this now. Okay. If you do not mind, then I would like to proceed further and move to the more specific case of how to deal with the failure in the case of simulations as a teaching method. So I would like to give the floor to Simon. Okay, unfortunately Simon is experiencing some problems, so we'll just wait for him to try to connect again. As I understand, Silvio might also help Simon with some technical advices on how to participate, to get connected again. Meanwhile, I would like to ask Alex, perhaps you would like to say something at this moment, to add something on what has been said?
Not necessarily a lot to add at the moment. I wanted to hear first all the groups, but I just wanted to add a thought that crossed my mind while listening to all your and reading the various contributions. I agree that it's a learning and teaching technique to let students fail and to kind of give them feedback. That's the whole idea, to give feedback and to guide them through the process. However, I find it different whether the students are graded for the various activities or not. And I think that will have been brought up probably later in the discussion. But I think it really matters, because if the students know that something will affect their grade, then the fear of failure comes in even stronger. And I think there we have to probably work even a bit more carefully to really try to make them understand that they can fail, they're allowed to fail, and that won't really affect the grade, or to explain, to be clear here, because otherwise there is really this barrier that blocks them, and the whole idea of trying to guide them through and let them fail and learn from that just won't work. So I think that's something I wanted to point out, but I'll probably give more thoughts at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. While we are still waiting for Simon, I would like to go through some other posts that you are actively sharing. So first of all, regarding the PBL, Heidi and other PBL participants have agreed that it is very important to explain during the first class very well the 4 steps of the PBL in order for the rules of student participation and interaction and the role of the instructor to be well understood by everyone and followed. And I believe that this is not just a specificity of PBL, no matter what kind of method we are using, and us as instructors, we also set some specific rules of class participation or some specific tasks, and it is very important to use especially a face-to-face meeting. If we talk about, for example, e-learning or blended learning courses, that is where the face-to-face element is crucial. At the beginning of the course, when the rules have to be well explained, there should be an instant interaction and exchange of ideas to allow to check that everybody has well understood the rules of the engagement, and if there are any potential challenges, to address them from the beginning. Now, Simon, fingers crossed, the floor is yours.
Let's see. So can you? I hope you can hear me. All right. Yes. Good. Obviously, my difficulty is that I haven't been able to hear what you've been talking about for quite a bit of our session. So forgive me if I repeat it, but I want to pick up on several of the things that I've been reading and that I have heard, because I think there's a lot of similarity. I think one of the things I've really appreciated, and I hope the group I'm working with has appreciated, is that failure is an inherent part of using simulation games, that we are almost designing failure as something that is going to happen. So if I take one very simple example, you remember the game with the cards that we played in Brussels? I played that with my students last week for my class here in Surrey, and they did it. They did the same things as you, but they did them in a different way. And we had a totally different set of conclusions and outcomes that came out of that very simple exercise. Now, at one level, that's failure, because they haven't reached the same kind of outcomes that you did, just as you failed to reach the same outcomes that they did. So I think we need to accept that in these kind of pedagogies where we're creating spaces for the construction of understanding, that necessarily we are going to find that people come up with different things. So it's a question of how comfortable we are with that difference between different groups and different individuals, and whether it's a problem. And I think really what we've got here is, in the discussion that we've been having, is again this idea that failure is fine as long as we learn from it. It's not that we're saying it doesn't matter if it didn't work. It's what will we do with that. So it's about students listening to the feedback of their colleagues, of the teachers, of reflecting on that, and not just not making the same mistake twice, but also thinking about, more broadly, what other kinds of mistakes will they try not to make in the future. So, I've not been able to have so much discussion with my group about the specifics, but if those of you who've been playing the game in the simulation group will have seen, you'll have seen that we're dealing with a rolling system of failures in different ways. So I've got a game that I've not trialed fully before, so I don't know what will happen. I've got a situation where I've got some people who are being very active. I've got some people who are being inactive at this point. So my dilemma as an instructor is, what do I do? So a bit like Heidi, wanting to jump in and fix it all. I don't have that problem because I don't know what it is I want to fix, or if there is anything to fix. That actually part of what you'll be learning is the fact that sometimes people don't participate and don't do the things that you ask of them. So partly there's this discussion we've got about preparation before the class, but what can you prepare in that kind of scenario? A lot of it is dependent on the interactions that you have with people. So preparation only takes you so far. So at some point, I as an instructor have to make allowances and accommodations for how things turn out.
We are waiting for Simon to come back, but so far I think it was clear what Simon had to say, so I would like to ask the simulation group participants to share their experience, as I said, more specifically on the simulation assignments, such as writing their own simulation game and outcomes of this assignment. Have you failed in writing the simulation game according to the rules? Was everything clear, especially taking into account this fact that we are having an online training, and perhaps there were some challenges also linked to the e-learning, for example, the use of technology, how this has determined some for example, instances of failing in the process of learning during your online training. Okay, I see that Ihor Melnichuk, for example, agrees with Simon that failure is mostly the challenge of the instructor, especially in simulations. It is, as I understand, and I would like Ihor to elaborate a bit on this, do you mean that if the instructor does a good job in explaining very specifically the rules and communicating all the tasks, this reduces the chance of failure? Is this what you refer to, Ihor? While Ihor is writing his answer, I see that some of you, for example, Tatiana, stresses the fact that sometimes it's not easy to understand whose failure are we talking about. Is it students' failure of not being prepared or motivated, or not participating, or being afraid to speak up, or is it instructors' failure to create the environment that enables desired learning? And I agree with what Tatiana says, that basically usually it is impossible to say that only one party is to blame or another, but sharing the blame and discussing it in class might be helpful. And it can help to find a way, an improving strategy that would be suitable for both parties, for students and instructor, taking into account students' expectations, instructors' expectations, course objectives, etc. Okay, I still do not see Igor's elaboration on his earlier comment, but I see others posting on that. And another thing that is stressed, especially in the case of simulations, is the importance of improvising. I think this is very important indeed, especially in simulations. Maybe simulations as pedagogical method gives more room to improvise and gives more room to go with the flow. However, I think improvising is also very important as a skill in any type of learning process. Again, if we are to talk about the case of e-learning or blended learning, the use of technologies, improvising in the process of applying some innovative tools and technologies is also very important, because there are a lot of factors that can make the learning process go wrong or lead to unexpected outcomes. And then we talk about improvising, but also flexibility of adapting quickly on time to the different situations is very important. And that is why actually we say that while experimenting with innovative teaching methods especially, instructors are expected to invest much more time, because they have to prepare more carefully, they have to make sure that they explain the rules of engagement very detailed. They should be able to provide support throughout the course, and usually nowadays instructors should be really very qualified also with regard to the use of IT technologies, even if we have, for example, IT staff that might be able to interfere. But if we are talk about this kind of improvising on the spot action or reaction to a particular situation in order to tackle a failure, for example, be it student failure or teacher's failure, then it is important to be able to react on time and have the adequate skills, including the IT skills. Now I see quite lively discussion going on with people agreeing and disagreeing. So it has to do with my earlier saying and my earlier reading of Tatiana's comment regarding blaming and sharing the blame. And now I also see Natalia Yurichuk, who agrees with Simon and Ihor that failure in simulation is mostly the instructor challenge. And she also acknowledges the fact that it's really difficult to motivate students to play simulation if it lasts for a long period of time. And that is why the instructor's role is not only to explain and to motivate, but also to control and remind students about their duties. That's true, but if I may also express my opinion on that, for us, at least also during this training, it has been a real challenge to control and to remind students about their duties, but this doesn't always help, because I believe that students should be also motivated and interested in getting engaged. Otherwise, it's just a one-way process of basically teaching and explaining from the side of instructors, and more or less silent audience from the part of the students. And by making this webinar more engaging from the side of training participants, I would like to remind again that you are welcome to take the floor. And I see that there are some quite lively discussions on the chat. So would anyone like to share their contributions and talk about your reflections? Simon, are you still with us or you are gone? Okay, but can you talk? We do not see you. Okay, now we can see you.
I can try and talk. I don't know how long you'll have me, but
Okay.
again, it's these points that are coming up again. You know that the creativity of the situation is the real benefit and advantage of having these kind of approaches, but also it's the big challenge that you know we're teaching life skills here. So you know, often when I'm teaching my students about negotiation and we're doing simulations, I'm saying, okay, you can meet, you can have these kind of discussions, you can fail in a safe environment where the consequences of failure are relatively small, but that can be then practiced for when you go out into the real world and you don't have that kind of safety net. So again, we can connect out of the classroom, and I think that's really useful because we can also then connect back in from outside of the classroom to give people something which is a useful thing, so they can understand how their learning in that environment fits into what they do more generally as people. Yeah, so I you know, it's not about the question about blame is non-existent. There isn't a question of blame. It's what do we do about the situation. So if I think about my IT problems, I have a failure that exists, which is probably something to do at my end, but I probably can't do everything I could to resolve it because I don't have access to the servers of the university. So I try some different things. Some of them work briefly, hopefully. Hopefully this thing that I've done, whatever it was, has worked. And then I hopefully learn from that experience. I thought I'd learned from the experience last time we did a webinar, which is why I used the other computer, but then that stopped working. So again, it's a constant process of challenging your practice, reflecting on what you've done, accommodating that for the future, but then always having a fallback. Okay, well, this doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in this situation. What can I do about that? So it's a series of skills that come around what you're doing. So that might be very high level skills about reflection, about adaptability. And I think that that's a really positive kind of thing because, again, it embeds the learning in a much more stable kind of way. And just to make one point, which I don't know if we've had made, failure is actually a really memorable learning experience. If you fail, and actually even if you fail badly, you remember that, you think that went really badly wrong. And I'm sure all of us who have taught have had something that's gone badly wrong, and you've remembered that because you don't want to go through that again. And you say, okay, well, how have I avoided that since? How am I going to carry on avoiding it? Now, what we're saying here is that actually that's a positive experience, even if at the time it felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to you. It's still something from which we can learn. So in terms of creating memorable occasions, things which come back to people at later points in their academic learning, in their lives, those kind of events are really positive. I'll stop there before I disappear again.
Thank you, Simon. That was a very good way of wrapping up the role of failure and especially the advantages of failing within the negotiations course, for example, or simulations course. I still believe that this particular teaching method is somehow more advantaged in having this safe environment for failing. And I think one of the strategies that we can learn from the simulation courses or negotiation courses is, if possible, to have, for example, a grading scale of pass and fail and not to have grade, for example, from 0 to 10, because when we have a grading scale of pass and fail, we are already more flexible in allowing students to fail, and there is more room to allow students to learn by doing or to experiment. I myself remember from my own experience, actually my first course at Maastricht University back in 2007 was negotiations, and students really enjoyed the course, especially because there was this pass and fail dimension, and they felt more open to engage in discussions and to seek also feedback and to work somehow in a more relaxed environment. Now, if I look at the posts that were put so far, I raised the question to our East European participants, and I would like to read it out loud to encourage more reactions to that. First of all, I said that safety net is a key strategy in dealing with failure, but unfortunately it is a challenge for us as instructors to implement it. And I would like to ask our East European training participants to share their experiences. Can you encourage students to fail in some rather safe environments? I mean, your educational systems, do they allow to practice failure? Or if you reflect upon some future course designs, do you envisage a way in which you could innovate your courses by introducing this aspect of failure as a learning process? One of the reactions I see from Anatoly Kruglashov, he says he's trying to give students some chances of making any suggestions and putting forward any idea while not grading them. So basically, as I understand, setting a rule that whatever you say or you suggest is welcome, and you might be you might rest assured that this would not affect your grade. That is a good strategy, but how can you elaborate a bit, Anatoly, on the context in which you, I mean, what kind of suggestions do you welcome from students? Are you talking about the beginning of the course when you are defining still the rules of the game or course objectives to meet the expectations, students' expectations, or what exactly are you referring to? Simon raised a question. A key question on grading is, what do we grade? Is it about success in outcomes or about quality of participation or about depth of reflection on participation? All valid options but different paths. True, Simon. So it always depends on what do we grade. But I think if we look across the different modern educational systems, the grading system that is mostly used is the one that focuses on the success in outcomes. And unfortunately, I believe that the part on reflection, especially self-reflection, like similar to the assessment that you use, I know, in your simulation course, negotiation course, is not so widespread. And I think it is also because it is not a so-called a traditional way of grading. It's something also innovative that presents challenges in implementing, and it also represents perhaps administrative challenges in introducing this kind of grading scheme and focus on self-reflection. But I would like to hear from others, especially from Eastern Europe. Do you use reflection, or especially like self-reflection essays, for example, as one of the assignment in your courses? And we got an answer, a specification from Anatoly. He says he's encouraging student suggestions and reflections when he's trying to discuss new content with students mostly. Thank you, Anatoly. Natalia Yurichuk says to help students to overcome the failure and start to work better, she thinks that we as instructors have to explain students that grade is just grade and life is going on and tomorrow will be better than today. That's true, but I think when the grade matters a lot, especially if we talk about I don't know, I remember myself while graduating, and first of all, my grades allowed me, for example, to get a tuition free or a scholarship. So grades matter a lot, either from the point of view of like financial support or paying for studies, or it might help in assessing candidates when applying for a job. So I think we might talk about that with students. They might partly agree with that, but it also depends on the educational system and to what extent the grades affect a future success or even the career of students. And I think this is something that we cannot fully control. And I see other colleagues agreeing that students are still very much grade-oriented. And getting some answers to my earlier question about the use of reflections, especially in Eastern European universities, I see some colleagues like Anatoly, but also Pavlo, saying that they do use essays and reflections, but still, for example, Anatoly says they are rare points. So it is good to see that at least in some extent this is used as a method of assessment. Now, if you will allow me, I would like to move to the specific group of e-learning and blended learning. Okay, I see Nino Lapiashvili asking to elaborate a bit more on self-reflection essays. You mean self-reflection on why they failed particular topic or the general self-reflection on the course? Maybe I could give the floor to Simon to elaborate on that, because I know that this is one of his usual ways of assessing students, and he can talk more about the advantages and the characteristics of self-reflection before we move to talking about e-learning.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been saying in the written discussion, I think that the value of writing reflective pieces or doing reflective assessment is that it avoids all the problems of creating situations where everyone has a possibility of winning, which might not be very lifelike in a lot of situations. It also gets around the problem of grading participation. I've sat through a lot of simulations over the years, and I still really struggle to get everything that's happening in a simulation with a group of people. So rather than trying to create some sense of objectivity that I can know what is happening in a room, understand the consequence of everything, and grade your participation, the problem really there is that often you end up giving grades to the people who are the loudest. We've all been in meetings where we know that the people who are the loudest are often the people with the least to say. So what I'm saying here is that by asking for reflective assessment, by saying, tell me what you did, how that worked, how it didn't work, I'm not only avoiding all the problems of the other processes, but I'm also putting forward the value of reflection to the students. And again, just looking at what we're talking about in the written comments, yes, students are grade orientated, but then you say, okay, the way you get grades is by being the thing that I want you to learn about, by being reflective. Okay, if you can demonstrate you're reflective, you get great marks. So for my students, when I'm talking, teaching them about negotiation, I'm saying, I don't really care if you have won or lost a game, if you have secured your objectives. What I care about is that you understand why that happened, that you used the strengths you had, that you managed the weaknesses that you had, that you've tried to learn from your previous experience. So, that seems like a much more reasonable way of doing things, because if we always say the only way you can get grades is by winning, then we create a different kind of dynamic. And particularly if we think about European institutions, often, what constitutes winning is very hard to identify, because you're making a big package deal between different actors, and often there isn't a clear winner, precisely because we don't want to have a clear winner. So, we have to think about those kind of questions as well. But I think reflective pieces are tricky. Students often don't have experience of doing them, but it can be something that's really valuable. And again, coming back to this theme of failure, knowing why you failed is really useful. Think about how you learned to ride a bicycle. You didn't learn to ride a bicycle by reading a book about how to ride a bicycle. You went out, you got on your bike, you tried to move forward on your bicycle, you fell off, maybe you fell off a lot of times, then you fell off some more in some different and exciting and maybe painful ways, but then eventually, I'm hoping, you picked up the aptitude for it, the acquaintance knowledge. And it's the same kind of thing here, that we're saying the doing is the useful thing, coupled to the reflection. That, you think about what you've done, you think about what worked and what didn't work. And if we can encourage that and give grades for that, then students will become interested in that. So again, we're just simply playing jujitsu with the students. We're saying, okay, you want grades, then you have to come and do the thing that I'm going to give you grades for. And I think if we tackle it like that, we can change students' attitudes quite radically, because I agree, it's rare for my students, just as it's rare for your students. But actually, when you explain it like that, the very large majority of them have no problem making that kind of shift.
Thank you, Simon. Anatoly, I see your microphone is on. Would you like to talk, to share your reflections?
Did you hear me? Did
Yes.
you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
fine. I just want to ask, because we have a lot of problems dealing with the problem of failure. I mean, starting from the technicality or technical problems as we learned today from our miscommunication, and concluding with the different stages of, I would say, learning process, starting from our teachers' preparations to the classes, and concluding with the final or intermediary evaluations. There are a lot of type of failures, yeah? But I would like to ask my question about your, master's university experience with regard to peer review of this practice, how to deal with failure. Do you have any kind of processes except the students' evaluations? The peer review of your success and failures balances. How you try to help your colleagues, especially younger one, to be acquainted with the typical failures and how to avoid them. Does the University of Maastricht have any kind of this practice?
Thank you, Anatoly. Heidi, are you with us? Could you answer this question? Otherwise, I can go ahead and I could elaborate a bit on my experience with Maastricht University. But if Anna or Aneta also would like to take the floor and talk a bit about FASOS and if there are some strategies of including this peer review, sorry for that. You are welcome to take the floor also. Just raise your hand or start your microphone. Yes, Anna, go ahead. Okay, I see Aneta and Anna have the microphone on, but I cannot hear you.
Natalia,
their microphones are just enabled, they're not on. So when you see that icon, then it means that I've enabled their rights to enable their microphones, but they're not enabled yet.
Okay, thank you. So whenever you are ready, just let us know, or you can also just start talking. My question, I see that Heidi is back. My question was about FASO's strategies of including this kind of peer feedback and self-reflection, and how to deal with failure within the PBL setting especially.
Hello, can you hear me again? I mean peer feedback. I mean, what we do a lot is that we use peer feedback, especially when students have to write papers. So but then it's actually part of an assignment. So one assignment is that they have to exchange papers. We give them clear guidelines of how to give feedback to their colleagues. So for example, they get the assessment form that we also use for grading the paper. And it's then their responsibility to read each other's papers, to give feedback until the next time. And I, for example, make it in written form, because otherwise students are like, oh yeah, we talk a bit. But in the end, what I do is that they have to bring something on paper, like a paragraph or two, of what they think about the paper. At the same time, I think then it's very important to also give students the room to discuss what they came up with, to talk of how they give feedback, to talk about how they also see how other people do something wrong, how other students struggle. And we do this because I'm always surprised of how well students actually also learn from other students' failure. So when they suddenly get a paper where they see, oh, my colleague doesn't have a research question, it's really hard to read the paper. Then they suddenly realize, oh, it might be a good strategy to have a research question in my own paper too. So we use it this way, but it depends on the course, of course. And I think it's then important, but to institutionalize it, to make it part of the course. And that's one thing that I always find useful in this regard too, is also to talk with students about this idea that we are failing sometimes too. So when we have this peer review session, I sometimes also tell them about the struggles that I have with my own papers, so that they also see it's normal to identify challenges. It's normal to not get it right the first time, but then to have to pick it up later. I think that's more or less from our side what I would comment for now.
Thank you, Heidi. From my side, I would like to say that for example, I am trying is whenever students have a presentation in small groups, like groups of 2 or 3, when the presentation is done, I give the floor for feedback from the peers, and I ask the students to give suggestions what they liked, starting with the positives, positive sides, what they would welcome in future presentations, for example, how others can learn, but also what could be improved. So basically not saying what was bad, but what could be improved and how it could be improved. And I could see, for example, that one of the challenges is that some students feel somehow shy in sharing their feedback because they are a bit concerned that whatever they would say, especially regarding the negative sides or what could be improved, might affect the grade of their friends, for example, or colleagues. But at the same time, when I'm also telling them that usually the same things that they notice, I might also notice, so it's not because of them pointing out to some specific issues that the grade of their friend or of their colleague would suffer, but because this is the truth and it's not the feedback, it's not about whom is the feedback coming from, but it's basically really just analyzing the situation and having a peer feedback. And I see that it works, and I think it also helps students to learn one from another and improve. And I can see a difference and improvement in the presentations, for example. I see Nino Lapiashvili posted a question. She says, can we say that it should be rather a win-win approach in terms of maximization of involvement of students rather than a result-oriented approach in terms of ending up with excellent grades? And Nino believes that a good strategy here could be the why approach. If we manage to give the students the rationale, what might be the benefits to be more proactive even if they fail, maybe we manage to transform their failures into the positive life experiences. Thank you, Nino. I see that Lasha is also typing and sharing his contribution. So I would like basically to round up on our discussion so far and move, as I said, more specifically to the group e-learning, blended learning group. There were some more specific readings, as I said at the beginning, dealing with factors that contribute to the student success and failure in the process of e-learning, which, as we discussed from the beginning, is very important to understand what causes failure, not to talk only about how to tackle failure, how to learn from failure, but if we look at the very beginning, why the failure emerges. I think when using e-learning or blended learning, this is crucial because this is something that instructors should take in very carefully into account and reflect upon when designing the course. And the way how the course is designed already matters a lot in ensuring student engagement, student motivation and success, especially when this distance in the virtual environment is present. Now, if I am to talk a bit about the specific questions that were asked within this e-learning group. So basically what we, Alexandra and I, expected from our students or training participants, we still perceive you as students in this training, is to reflect upon the factors that influence the achievement in online courses. So what triggers student achievement and what are the main barriers to student achievement? And one of the key factors that has been highlighted in the literature is the student motivation. So discussing basically what is the role of student motivation in student success in online courses. And last but not least, what is the role of instructor interaction, especially keeping the human factor, but also instructor feedback in achieving success, student success in the learning process. So just to give a bit of a broader background coming from the literature, when we talk about the e-learning, we talk about the e-learning as complementing the traditional learning. So as it was stated also in Brussels, e-learning should not be perceived as an alternative or a substitute to the traditional learning approaches. It should be rather perceived as a complementing tool or environment in order to increase the success of the learning process. But unfortunately, while e-learning increases in one way the success of the learning process, it also brings new challenges. So among those challenges are, first of all, the need to have a constant access to help and support, to have support specialists, basically 24 hours, 7 days out of 7, that would be able to give timely feedback and answer to the learners across the different geographical places, but also we need to realize the importance of change management, of accessibility, and the technology access and reliability that all have a significant impact on the quality of web-supported learning. At the same time, if we move beyond this IT-enhanced learning, the core challenges pressed in how to increase the interaction in the learning process. We talk about the different types of interaction, such as instructor-student interaction, student-student interaction, or especially when we talk about the online courses or blended learning courses, we also talk about instructor-instructor interaction, because usually the design of online courses or blended courses and the implementation of the blended courses is done by more than one instructor. Usually we have a team, for example, of academic staff and an IT staff, or we have more academic staff working together. So all these types of interaction are important, and some of the core questions rest still into how to increase the level of interaction and how to ensure continuous channels for interaction, but also for feedback. So now I would like to ask the e-learning training participants to share their reflections on the suggested readings. I see Simon posting something on online teaching. And his post says, online teaching means you lose a lot of normal prompts to participation, so it's useful to have people who can be active in groups, like Anna is in our little game right now. Thank you, Simon. That's true. Anyone else? I don't know if Maxim Yakovlev is still with us. Maxim, would you like to share your reflections on what are the factors contributing to the failure in the e-learning environment? Okay. From our group, I saw that Pavlo Molochko is very active, and I would like to thank you for that. He also has posted his reflection on the questions that we raised regarding the failure in the e-learning process. And the points that Pavlo highlighted was, first of all, the importance of student motivation and how to motivate students during the learning process also, but at the same time the importance of clearly explaining the rules, and from the student side, students being able to understand what is required from them during the course, and they have to be able to understand what benefits they are offered when, for example, they fulfill the tasks and meet the deadlines. And the challenge for instructor in this case is to provide basically, as Pavlo says, a total understanding of everything to the students. So basically, the instructors should spend a lot of time into defining the rules and tasks, but also making sure continuously that there is a way of monitoring the process of meeting the requirements, and also communicating to the students what are the benefits of basically following the rules. Pavlo, are you with us? Would you like to talk maybe also about your reflections, to take the floor? I would like to share with you that Pavlo said that instructor interaction and feedback are among the factors that influence achievements in online courses. And a student needs to be appraised. He or she may ask for an additional explanation or help, but they also need to know whether they are on the right track. And here is the moment when we say that feedback is very important in guiding students throughout the learning process and basically supporting them constantly. And one of the readings, for example, dealing with the student success or failure in the learning process also stresses the fact that nowadays there is a changing role of instructor, not only towards more of a facilitator or coach in the learning process, in the online learning process, but also instructor's role of support person, providing social effective support becomes an important element in collaborative online work groups to give the students a sense of belonging and help motivate them to apply themselves to the tasks at hand, especially at times when they are finding their study difficult to manage. Especially when we talk about online learning, students might become often frustrated when something goes wrong, and we talk about technology going wrong, lack of peer interaction or peer feedback, and therefore this kind of role of instructor as a support person is also a new dimension added to the nowadays teacher, especially when we talk about the online learning and the presence of the human factor. Okay, we understand that Pablo has problems with the Connect app to talk. Now, Anatoly says on the failure and the experience at his university that at Chernivtsi University they have some formal mechanisms as mutual visiting classes and evaluating the results, including failure, but they are not concentrating on failures in the first place. Now, Igor also reacted on Pavlo's reflection, saying, of course, as Pavlo wrote, the instructor has to be patient to explain all rules and make them extremely clear for students, but he thinks that some of students are always late with deadlines, and that also is a problem for instructor and further evaluation. Yeah, I think learning to live with the deadlines is one of the skills that students have to acquire throughout their learning process, and it has to do also with the self-discipline, which especially in online courses is a very important factor. So we talk about student motivation being a crucial factor in student success or failure in the online learning, but also self-discipline being a crucial factor, because when students have the freedom and flexibility and they are not as constrained as in the traditional classrooms, there is always the challenge of self-disciplining and putting individual limits on the flexibility of the learning process, and the time management element also being a very important factor. Now, Pablo says that one of the main problems for instructors is also technical skills of instructors. And Lasha Bazunaishvili also says that one one of their first strategies in the classroom should be to determine who is a potential loser or candidate for failure from the beginning of the semester, and working with those specific students additionally, focusing on the specific student needs. That's true, this is one of the good strategies, but at the same time I would like to ask Lasha, how do you do that? You work with them additionally, you mean during your office hours, or you mean in the classroom, just finding mechanisms of engaging those students to give them more room to talk and to express themselves during the usual class time? Okay, Lasha says office hours. Yeah, thank you. I think this would best work when we talk about small groups of students, which I believe is not really the case, for example, at Maastricht University at least. I don't know about Surrey, when we have a class or a tutor that has to deal with a rather big number of students and also different modules, and then using office hours for working additionally with students and helping them to succeed is rather a challenge because of the time constraint on the instructor. Heidi, what would you say about that? Do you use office hours, for example, to help students that are potentially in danger regarding their performance during the learning process?
Thanks for the question. I think there are two things. I mean, I think that's a bit the way we mix up our discussion now about what we mean with failure. I mean, we use office hours as coordinator. I meet with students who really struggle, who are committed, who try to do their things, but they have problems. And that normally 20 minutes is good enough. But at the same time, of course, you can't meet everyone who might fail the course because perhaps they didn't read, or perhaps because they didn't prepare. So it's then also the task of the tutors. I think it's good sometimes to have these bilateral meetings with students, especially in a PBL setting when you have shy students. It's very important perhaps to talk with them about strategies of how to get involved, of how to make sure that they feel comfortable with hearing their own voice. But at the same time, I think it's important when having these reflection rounds to actually have it multilaterally, because students are very good in picking up what's wrong or what should be improved. And it gives them confidence when even if they didn't manage to say, well, let's think about what were the elements that we need to improve. And if they do it well, that can be a good first step to improving. So this is on the one hand. On the second hand, I think it's very important that also other students can hear the feedback that one gives to a group or to an individual student. Because again, they can support each other and they are supposed to work as a group. So we use open office hours, but I would say just in very few cases. So really a few students where we see they struggle. Sometimes it's students that, for example, have problems with reading in the first year. So we really go with them through strategies of how to read a text. Or, for example, in the first year we have a mentor program. So I have my 50 mentor students. I normally have 2-3 students who come after they failed an exam just to check what did they do wrong, especially when it comes to essay writing. So I think in this regard, open office hours can help. But I think it's also very important to point out again to students, I can try to help you, but I'm not fixing your problems. That's your own responsibility. Especially when it then comes to this minimum standards that students are supposed to do.
Thank you, Heidi. Alex, what about virtual office hours? How useful or successful are they from your point of view when talking about blended learning or online learning?
Yes, from our experience, we introduced virtual office hours, I don't know, almost a year ago. They can be useful indeed because we use the webinar platform, so the Adobe Connect, and it's a kind of, creating a kind of group feeling in the sense that you see the other people that take the course, and then you can ask each other questions, or it's a bit like what we do now. And indeed that helps, I think, first of all, with clarifying any problems related to the administrative part of the course, let's say, exams, I don't know, workload, and so on. What we experienced so far is that not a lot of but that's really our personal experience with that. Not a lot of the students really felt like discussing content-related issues during the office hours. They more came to ask or to consult us about the studying process as such, what are our tips, and also, of course, how should they prepare for the exam. So it's more, it was more admin or communication, but as a communication tool, I find it really useful. Because you can clarify a lot of issues that might be still unclear in a written form, in emails, email exchanges, and so on. But on the other hand, probably they could be better used in a more structured way. We're going to attempt some different versions of the office hours to introduce a bit more content in it as well. So we're going to see how that works. But I think it's a good point, especially when you have online students, because this gives a bit of face-to-face, even though virtual, kind of feel to it. And I think that's very important for in general, to avoid any confusions, to try to clarify things, content-wise or just communication issues. But I think it's a very good tool. It's working well. It tries to replace the normal office hours.
Thank you, Alex. Anyone else would like to share the chat posts or to talk about the challenges with student success or student failure or instructor's success or failure in online or blended learning? Perhaps also reflecting upon the assignments that you had to prepare, for example, developing course content within the e-learning blended learning group. I'm sorry for forgetting sometimes to turn on the microphone before talking. If there are no more thoughts to share, I would like to wrap up today's webinar discussion. First of all, let me thank you all for being virtually present here. It was nice to see most of you being so actively engaged. We have a long chat conversation here full of interesting ideas, reflections, and also tips. And as I said, this webinar has been recorded and the link will be available online. So you are always free to go back and listen to it again, take further notes, and we will definitely use most of the reflections and how-to strategies also while writing our training handbook. So we will come back to some of these major issues. And I am particularly very grateful to see that we could have this cross-group discussion and questions that were actually engaging different university partners, and that we could also see what are the challenges that you are confronted with within your particular education system, and to share with you, for example, our experience as instructors within the PBL method framework or simulations framework or e-learning blended learning framework. So I see there are some questions from Max, but as I understand, they are more technical questions, how to deal with a web platform now during the training. Am I right? Or is it something that has to be discussed now in the group? Okay, Max confirms that I am right. Okay, then I would like to thank everyone once again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for very interesting questions, reflections, and for your contributions. And let me just remind you to remind your colleagues who could not make it today that we are still looking forward to see as many of you as possible taking part in the online training work. And it is very important for us and for our project that, of course, all of you can benefit as much as possible from all of our efforts to share with you our experience and to help you to learn more about these innovative teaching methods. If I may talk also on behalf of the e-learning blended learning group, which I am a group leader of, we would like to see more people getting engaged and respect the deadlines. As you could see, it is a challenge with our own students to get them respect the deadlines, and I would like to also remind you to respect the deadlines set by group leaders, because without working on the assignment on time, we cannot move forward as the assignments are related one to another. So we are still looking for your contributions, for your homework to be shared on the platform. And in case if you have any questions at all, either of technical nature or any other nature, just feel free to contact the group leader or the online training coordinators, Alex, myself, and Silvio, if more specifically dealing with the technical matters. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening, and then see you during the next webinar. Goodbye.